The hall was already full when she walked in. Chairs scraped the floor, quiet talks mixed with nervous laughter, and the sound of instruments being tuned filled the air. Banners hung on the walls, showing the name of the competition and the promise of opportunity for anyone who stood out today. Most people there looked confident. They carried themselves like they belonged on that stage. She did not. She entered slowly, holding her bag close to her side. Her clothes were simple, clean but worn. She did not look around much, not because she was scared, but because she had learned over time that people often judged before knowing anything real. She chose a seat near the back, away from the loud groups and proud smiles. From there, she watched. One by one, contestants stepped forward to register. Some spoke loudly about their training, others joked about how easy the pieces would be. A few glanced in her direction and then quickly looked away, as if she was not worth noticing. She did not mind. Being unseen had been part of her life for a long time. Music had not come from a fancy school or expensive lessons for her. It came from quiet nights, old instruments, and moments when the world felt too heavy to speak. She learned by listening, by repeating sounds until they felt right. No one had told her she was good. No one had encouraged her to dream big. Music was simply the one place where she felt honest. As the judges took their seats, the room grew quieter. They were experienced, serious people, dressed neatly, holding clipboards and papers filled with notes. They had seen many performers before. They had expectations, and those expectations shaped how they looked at the stage. When her turn came to step forward, one of the judges looked up briefly and then back down again. She handed in her form. The judge skimmed it quickly, eyes pausing for a second longer than usual. There were no famous teachers listed. No big achievements. Just a few small local events and personal practice. The judge cleared their throat and spoke in a polite but distant tone. Since time is limited, the judge said, you may play the easiest melody on the list. The words were not rude, but they carried weight. A few people nearby smiled. Someone behind her whispered something and laughed quietly. The message was clear. This was not expected to be impressive. She nodded once. Okay, she said softly. As she walked toward the stage, the lights felt brighter than she expected. The distance between her seat and the instrument felt longer than it really was. Every step echoed in her ears. She could feel eyes on her back, not with hope, but with curiosity and doubt. She sat down and placed her bag gently on the floor. Her hands rested in her lap for a moment. They were steady, even though her heart was beating faster. She had been in moments like this before, moments where people assumed she was less than she was. In those moments, she had learned something important. If she tried to impress, she failed. If she played honestly, she survived. The instrument in front of her was well cared for. She touched the keys lightly, not yet playing, just feeling their weight and response. The room was quiet now. Even the whispers had stopped. People were waiting, some with patience, some with boredom. Her mind drifted for a moment, not to the competition, but to a small room she once practiced in. The walls were thin, the floor cold, and the sound was never perfect. But she remembered how she would play late into the night, not for applause, but because it helped her breathe. Those memories grounded her. She straightened her back and adjusted her seat. The judge nodded slightly, signaling that she could begin whenever she was ready. No one expected more than a short, simple tune. That was fine. She was not there to fight expectations. She was there to tell the truth in the only way she knew how. Before playing, she paused. Not long enough to feel awkward, but long enough to settle herself. In that pause, the noise of the world faded. There was no competition, no judges, no crowd. There was only sound waiting to be born. The first note had not yet been played, but something had already shifted. A few people leaned forward without realizing it. The room felt different, as if it was holding its breath. She placed her fingers on the keys, calm and certain, ready to begin the simplest melody everyone thought they already knew. And in that moment, before a single sound filled the hall, no one yet understood that what they were about to hear would challenge everything they believed about talent, effort, and quiet strength. The easiest melody was about to reveal much more than anyone expected. The first note filled the hall softly, almost gently. It was exactly what everyone expected. Simple, clean, and familiar. A few people relaxed in their seats, already thinking they knew how this would end. Some judges glanced at their papers, ready to mark quickly and move on. She played the opening exactly as written. No rush. No extra flair. Just the melody as it was meant to be. Her fingers moved with care, each note placed where it belonged. It was not loud, but it was clear. The sound carried in a way that made people listen without trying. As the melody continued, something subtle began to change. It was not a sudden trick or a dramatic move. It was feeling. The simple tune started to breathe. Each note leaned gently into the next, like a quiet conversation instead of a performance. A few heads lifted. Someone in the middle rows stopped tapping their foot and looked up. She was not thinking about the audience. Her focus was inward. She remembered playing this same melody years ago in a place where no one clapped. Back then, it had been a way to calm herself after long days. She had learned that even the simplest music could carry deep emotion if played with honesty. Her hands remained steady, but her touch grew warmer. The melody stayed simple, yet it felt fuller, as if it held more meaning than before. The judges began to notice. One of them leaned forward slightly, eyes fixed on her hands instead of the paper. In the crowd, a quiet shift happened. People who had whispered earlier now sat still. No one laughed. No one spoke. The room felt smaller, closer, drawn into the sound. It was not about skill alone. It was about control, patience, and something harder to explain. She allowed brief pauses between certain notes, not enough to change the melody, but enough to let each sound settle. Those pauses spoke as loudly as the notes themselves. They carried a sense of confidence, not the kind that demands attention, but the kind that knows it does not need to ask. The melody reached a familiar turn, one that many beginners rushed through. She did not. She slowed just enough to let it land. The sound hung in the air, and for a moment, it felt like time stretched. A judge's pen stopped moving. Another judge glanced sideways, surprised. Her breathing stayed calm. Each breath matched the rhythm of her playing. She was no longer aware of the bright lights or the rows of faces. The hall faded away, replaced by a quiet inner space where music felt safe and true. This was where she had always played best. As the tune moved forward, her control became more visible. There were no mistakes, no shaking hands, no hesitation. But more than that, there was intention. Every note had a reason. It felt like she was telling a story without words, one that spoke of waiting, of being overlooked, and of holding on. In the audience, a young contestant near the front swallowed hard. They had practiced harder pieces for months, believing difficulty alone proved talent. Listening now, they felt something shift inside them. This simple melody sounded more alive than anything they had prepared. The judges were fully engaged now. One of them adjusted their glasses, eyes narrowing not in doubt, but in focus. Another stopped writing entirely. The easiest melody on the list no longer felt easy. It felt exposed, like it revealed the truth of the person playing it. She reached the middle of the piece, where many expected the sound to stay flat. Instead, she gave it depth through touch alone. No extra notes. No changes to the melody. Just control of pressure, timing, and emotion. The hall felt heavy with silence between notes. Someone in the back leaned forward, elbows on knees. Another held their breath without realizing it. The simple tune had drawn everyone in, not by force, but by sincerity. It reminded them of something personal, something they had forgotten. Her fingers moved with quiet confidence. She did not rush to finish. She let the melody unfold naturally, like it had all the time it needed. There was no fear now, only presence. This was not about proving anything. It was about sharing something real. As she approached the final section, the room was completely silent. Even the smallest movement felt loud. The judges waited, not for it to end, but to hear where she would take them next within the limits of that simple tune. She played the final notes gently, allowing the sound to fade on its own. Her hands lifted slowly from the keys, not in pride, but in respect for the music. The last note lingered, then disappeared. For a brief moment, no one moved. No one clapped. No one spoke. It was not confusion. It was shock mixed with something deeper. They had expected a quick performance to forget. Instead, they had been quietly pulled into something they did not expect at all. She sat still, eyes lowered, waiting. She did not look at the judges. She did not search for reactions. She simply breathed, knowing she had played the truth as best as she could. And in that silence, it became clear that the simplest melody had done something powerful. It had forced everyone in the room to listen, not just to the music, but to the person behind it. Whatever happened next, nothing would feel quite the same. The silence after the final note did not break right away. It stayed in the air, thick and heavy, as if the room itself needed time to understand what had just happened. She remained seated, hands resting lightly on her lap, eyes still lowered. Her face showed no excitement or fear. It was calm, almost peaceful. One of the judges cleared their throat, but no words came out at first. Another judge slowly placed their pen down, as if writing anything immediately would feel wrong. The audience waited, unsure how to react. They were used to loud endings, fast applause, and clear signals. This moment offered none of that. She finally looked up, not searching for approval, but simply returning to the room. Her eyes moved briefly across the hall, taking in the faces. Some looked confused. Some looked moved. A few looked shaken, as if they had been reminded of something personal they had forgotten long ago. A quiet clap started somewhere near the back. It was hesitant, unsure. Then another followed. Soon, the sound grew, not loud or wild, but steady and honest. Applause filled the hall, rising naturally, without force. It was not the kind meant to impress. It was the kind that came from respect. She stood slowly and gave a small nod. No bow. No smile meant to perform. Just a simple acknowledgement. She picked up her bag and stepped away from the instrument, walking back toward her seat. The lights felt softer now. The walk felt shorter. As she sat down, she noticed how different the room felt. People who had ignored her earlier now glanced in her direction. Some looked curious. Others looked thoughtful. No one laughed. No one whispered. The air carried a quiet awareness. The next contestant went on stage and played a complex piece with speed and sharp movements. The notes were impressive, fast, and loud. The audience clapped politely. But something was missing. The sound filled the room, but it did not settle in the same way. She listened without judgment. She understood effort. She respected practice. But she also knew that skill alone did not always reach people. Music needed space to breathe, and truth to stand on. The competition continued. Performers came and went, each bringing something different. Some played with confidence. Some with fear. Some with clear talent. Yet, every now and then, eyes drifted back toward her. Not because she demanded attention, but because she had already left a mark. During a short break, judges leaned toward one another and spoke in low voices. Their expressions were serious, focused. Papers were turned. Notes were reviewed. One judge gestured toward the stage, then toward the audience, as if describing a feeling rather than a sound. She sat quietly, hands folded, waiting. She did not replay her performance in her mind. She did not wonder what she could have done better. She had given what she had. That was enough. A memory surfaced gently. A time when she had been asked to stop playing because it was too quiet. Another time when someone said she lacked presence. Those words had stayed with her for years. Sitting there now, she felt them loosen their grip. As the final performer finished, the room returned to silence once more. The judges took a moment before standing. One of them stepped forward and addressed the audience. Their voice was calm, measured. They spoke about technique, dedication, and growth. They spoke about how competitions often reward difficulty and speed. Then they paused. The pause felt intentional. Sometimes, the judge said, the simplest choices reveal the most truth. A few heads turned toward her. She felt the attention, but it did not make her tense. It felt distant, like watching rain through a window. The judge continued, speaking about listening, about control, about the courage to do less when everyone expects more. Each word landed gently but clearly. She realized then that this moment was bigger than ranking or prizes. It was about being seen in a way she had not been before. Not for effort alone, not for struggle, but for honesty. When the judges announced that selected performers would move to the final consideration, her name was included. There was a soft wave of reaction in the room. Surprise, curiosity, quiet approval. She felt a small shift inside her chest. Not excitement. Not fear. Something steadier. Something like relief. As the audience slowly began to move, people passed by her seat. A few nodded. One person whispered, "That was beautiful." Another said nothing but smiled. She gathered her things and stood. The hall looked different now. Not smaller, not larger. Just clearer. As she walked toward the exit for a short break, she understood something important. She had not shocked the room by being louder, faster, or more complex. She had done it by being present. The simplest melody had opened a door. What waited beyond it was still unknown. But for the first time, she felt ready to walk through, not to prove herself, but to continue telling the truth through sound. And somewhere deep inside, she knew this was only the beginning. The break ended sooner than she expected. A soft announcement called selected performers back into the hall. The room felt different now, not louder, but heavier, filled with quiet attention. People took their seats again, but the energy had shifted. There was less noise, less showing off. More listening. She returned to her seat slowly, feeling the weight of what had already happened. She reminded herself to stay present. Whatever came next did not need fear or pride. It only needed honesty. The judges spoke briefly among themselves before calling the next round. This time, their tone was more careful. They explained that the remaining performers would be asked to play a piece of their choice, something that showed who they truly were as musicians. A few contestants looked excited. Others looked nervous. Choice was powerful, but it was also revealing. As names were called, performers stepped forward one by one. Some chose difficult pieces, full of fast movement and sharp turns. Others chose emotional pieces they clearly loved. The audience listened closely, clapping politely after each performance. She waited. When her turn came, the judge looked at her directly this time. Not over her head. Not past her shoulder. Straight at her. "Take your time," the judge said. She nodded. She walked to the instrument again, feeling the familiar calm settle into her body. Sitting down, she placed her hands in her lap and closed her eyes for a brief moment. She did not choose a difficult piece. She did not choose something meant to impress. She chose a melody she had played many times before, one that carried quiet meaning. It was simple, but not empty. The first notes flowed gently, like a soft conversation. The sound filled the hall without pushing. It invited people in instead of demanding attention. This time, the audience was ready. They listened deeply, as if they understood that something honest was being shared. Her playing carried emotion without exaggeration. Each note felt intentional, steady, and warm. The melody moved slowly, allowing space for breath and reflection. A judge leaned back slightly, hands folded, eyes closed. Another followed the movement of her fingers carefully, noticing how little effort she used to create so much feeling. She stayed grounded in the moment. There was no need to think ahead. No need to wonder about results. The music guided her. Halfway through the piece, a memory surfaced. A time when she had almost quit. When someone told her that quiet playing would never stand out. Sitting there now, she realized how wrong that advice had been. The melody reached its center, a point where emotion rested gently instead of rising sharply. The hall felt still. Even breathing felt slower. She finished the piece with care, letting the final note fade naturally. Her hands rested on the keys for a moment before lifting away. Silence followed again, but this time it felt different. Not shocked. Not uncertain. It felt full. The applause that came was steady and sincere. Not loud, not wild. Honest. She stood and stepped away quietly. As she returned to her seat, she noticed small changes in the room. Faces looked softer. Shoulders relaxed. The judges spoke again after the final performance. They did not rush. They thanked everyone for sharing something personal. Then they spoke about courage. Not the courage to be bold, but the courage to be real. They spoke about how music was not just sound, but space, timing, and truth. As the judges discussed among themselves, the audience waited. The air felt thick with anticipation, but not stress. When the final decision was announced, her name was called again. This time, louder reactions followed. Not surprise. Recognition. She felt a gentle wave of emotion rise in her chest. She breathed through it. This moment was not about winning. It was about being understood. As the round ended, people approached her quietly. Some thanked her. Some shared short words. Others simply nodded. She listened without needing to respond much. The music had already said enough. Walking toward the side of the hall, she realized something important. She had not changed who she was to fit the room. The room had changed because she stayed true to herself. The competition was nearing its end. The final moments waited ahead. And for the first time, she did not feel like an outsider standing at the edge. She felt like she belonged exactly where she was. The final moments of the competition arrived quietly. There was no dramatic announcement, no loud music playing in the background. People simply returned to their seats, aware that something meaningful was about to be decided. The hall felt calm, almost respectful, as if everyone understood this was more than a normal event. She sat still, hands resting gently in her lap. Her breathing was slow and steady. Whatever happened next would not change what she had already gained. She had been heard. That alone felt like a victory. The judges gathered at the front of the hall. They spoke softly among themselves, reviewing notes and exchanging thoughtful looks. No one rushed them. The audience waited in silence, patient and attentive. When the lead judge finally stepped forward, the room became completely still. Their voice was calm and clear. They spoke about the purpose of music, about how it connects people in quiet ways, about how true skill is not always loud or complex, but honest and controlled. Every word felt carefully chosen. They explained that many performances that day were strong and impressive. Hard work was clear. Talent was visible. But one performance had reminded them why music mattered in the first place. She felt a gentle tightening in her chest, not fear, not excitement, but recognition. When her name was called, there was no sudden explosion of sound. Instead, the applause rose slowly, growing stronger with each second. People stood, not all at once, but naturally, as if guided by the same feeling. She remained seated for a moment, letting the sound wash over her. Then she stood and walked toward the stage. Her steps were calm. Her head was held naturally, not high, not low. The judges smiled warmly as she approached. One handed her a simple award. Nothing large or flashy, but it felt heavy with meaning. She thanked them quietly. Her voice was steady. She did not give a long speech. She did not need to. As she stepped back, she caught sight of the audience. Some faces showed joy. Some showed thought. Some looked inspired in quiet ways. She returned to her seat, holding the award gently. It was not the object that mattered. It was the moment. After the event ended, the hall slowly emptied. People gathered their belongings, speaking softly, as if they did not want to break the feeling that still lingered. A few people approached her again. Some asked how long she had been playing. Others said her music made them feel calm or remembered something important. She listened carefully, responding with simple words. Outside the hall, the air felt cooler. The noise of the world returned, but it felt distant. She walked slowly, letting everything settle. She thought about where she would go next. There was no clear plan. No sudden promise of fame or change. But there was confidence now. Quiet, steady confidence. She knew she would keep playing. Not to impress. Not to compete. But to stay connected to that honest place inside her. In the days that followed, small opportunities appeared. Invitations to play at local events. Messages from people who had been there that day. Nothing overwhelming. Just doors opening one at a time. She chose carefully. She stayed true to herself. At night, she returned to the same simple melodies that had always comforted her. The same quiet practice. The same gentle focus. But something had changed. She no longer felt invisible. The memory of that first request stayed with her. Asked to play the easiest melody. Asked without expectation. Asked without belief. And yet, that simple request had revealed something powerful. It showed that real strength does not always arrive with noise. Sometimes it arrives softly, waits patiently, and speaks only when it is ready. Her journey did not end with that competition. It simply became clearer. And somewhere, in another quiet room, someone else would one day hear a simple melody and realize that it was never about how hard the music was, but how honestly it was played.